Hello, everyone. How did Mother's Day go? If you are glad it's over, if you're breathing a sigh of relief, don't worry, there's always next year. It's coming around again. How will Father's Day go? If you're kind of dreading that too, then maybe it's time to look at what are some issues that aren't being addressed. Primarily with the issues of boundaries. We'll look at that next on Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? John Euler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. John has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And John Euler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Hello, everyone. My name's John Euler, and this is Journey to Healing. Sorry, I was just adjusting my mic. Welcome to our journey through grief and loss, an extended journey, and we are doing a deep dive into an issue that not many people think of when they think of the idea of grief and loss or the concept of it. We are looking at boundaries. We're looking at relationships that keep things stirred up so that we never have a chance to finally have things calm down so that we can address past losses. Grief is the process of coming to terms with loss. If you have chaos in the current day, you will find it impossible to address things that are unfinished. We would like to believe, we want to believe that time heals all wounds. That actually is rarely the case. Maybe with superficial wounds, but the significant ones, it doesn't work that way. We wish it did. If you would like to access any previous programs, any parts as far as part 1 and part 2 of these programs, we actually cut them in half. You can access an ever-growing repository of those on SurvivorSupport.net under podcasts. You'll see a lot of things we've covered. We've covered the issue of very dysfunctional relationships. We're still going to tackle that a little bit. But we've looked at some very unhealthy relationships that we actually are not supposed to have in our lives. A lot of the issues that are dealt with in professional counseling, in one way or another, have to do with relationships that are not healthy, relationships that are not based upon respect. Yet someone is hanging in there. They're tolerating, they're putting up with people, quite frankly, that they shouldn't, or relationships that are being allowed to remain as they are, which are hurting others. They're hurting someone. They're probably hurting you. We looked at a number of aspects of that, so I encourage you to go back and look at some of those programs. We're dealing with the topic of boundaries. We started a couple of weeks ago. We're now looking at what are they and why are they important? What is the purpose of boundaries? We looked at the rationale, meaning are boundaries something that are even legitimate to look at? And we looked at that in depth. In fact, if you don't have boundaries, and boundaries denote and connote and separate out issues of importance. You have a property line, for instance, if you have a home. Why is that important? Why can't you just build a fence in an approximate area? You know, it takes, somebody's going to come out and have to survey the property, so to speak, and find exactly where that line is. In the overall scope of things, does it matter 6 inches or not? In a way, yeah. To those of us that deal in proximity, maybe it doesn't matter. But when you're dealing with really important things, sometimes precision does matter. So in terms of property line, we understand that it's important. if I cross over somebody's boundaries and I'm uninvited and they call the police, well, hopefully they would have talked about it first. But let's say they call the police. Let's say they have talked enough and I have still disregarded their requests. I still continue to go over on their side of the property. What do we call that? What are the police going to write down as far as the charges? Trespassing. That's right. Jesus used that term. Forgive us our debts, or also translated, forgive us our trespasses. Well, if there's no such thing as boundaries, then there is no such thing as trespassing. You are important by virtue of the fact that you have a pulse that is created, that is given and granted by our Creator. The Founding Fathers understood that. They said these things are no-brainers. These things are self-evident. We consider these things to be self-evident. That what? All men are created and endowed with certain unchangeable or inalienable rights. Well, that presupposes that that is true, and it is true. Okay, so you matter. We went in depth into what does that mean? Jesus used the concept of a pearl. Do not take your pearls, your time, effort, energy, resources, those things that are important to you, because you are a steward of those pearls, and you will be called to give an account someday of how you dealt with your pearls. How did you handle those things that were entrusted to you? If you give them, if you cast them, if you give them to pigs, Jesus was not calling names. He said two things that are very, very important. He said, do not give what is special or holy. That really means separate or separated. Most people have good dishes. You have a set of good dishes that you bring out at important times, a couple times a year probably. And if they're really valuable, do you have the kids wash them? Probably not. You set them aside and you'll wash them. Why? Because they are valuable. They're either monetarily valuable, they either cost a lot of money, or sometimes they have sentimental value. So either way, we tend to put those away. We separate them out. That's that concept. Don't take what is precious, what is valuable, what is highly valuable, and give them to dogs. Okay, that was not a cultural statement. It's looking at those in a third world country. Dogs sometimes can be seen running between houses, sometimes in packs. But what do? They're running free. They're not controlled. They're not tame. They're not domesticated. So don't give what is important to those outside the home. And don't take what is important, your pearls, and give them to a pig, which is inside the home, which is in your property area, right? So Jesus is really saying two things. You need to have discernment. That's different than being judgmental. And we tackled that in a previous podcast. We have to have discernment so that we are assured we are being a good steward and we are investing our time, effort, energy, resources wisely. Because what happens? Jesus goes on to say, this is Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, that if we cannot discern who we're dealing with, or if we know and we still hope that a pig is not going to be a pig, and trust me, a pig is a pig. As a matter of fact, the program, How Big of a Pig, I would recommend that. I did that a couple of weeks ago. You can find that again on SurvivorSupport.net. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being minor, we all do minor things. That's not what we're talking about. It takes work. It takes work to morph into a pig because you have to violate your conscience on a consistent basis to where you get to a point where you are glad you don't have a conscience. So that's why if you wait for a pig to finally get with the program and apologize and amend his behavior, he's not going to. And that's why, in essence, Jesus is saying, dust your sandals off. Now, again, does that mean for a spouse you run out and get a divorce right away? No. What it means is this. You begin to separate. Proverbs chapter 26, 27, and 28 written 3,000 years ago, long before psychology, said what to do with fools. A pig, a dog, and a fool are all synonymous within Scripture. And I covered this briefly, but psychology comes along, and I would submit to you the term psychopath, the term white-collar psychopath, Robert Hare, the godfather of psychopathy. I'm certified in the PCLR. He coined the term white-collar psychopath. That matches the biblical term for a fool and a pig and a dog. What are the three key characteristics of a psychopath? It simply means they don't have a conscience because they've worked hard not to have one. It is neither nature nor nurture. It is by choice. They have no conscience, and therefore they do not feel sorry for what they do. That's lack of remorse. And they don't care about the impact. That is a lack of empathy. If you're dealing with someone who has shown those characteristics, or you can pay for a brain scan if they're willing to cooperate, because you can actually see a brain scan of a psychopath will show very unique and distinct characteristics. You can actually do a Google search, look up brain scans of psychopaths, and you'll see it's very, very different. In Romans 1, it's called a reprobate mind. This is a selfish person. Now overlay that with sexual deviance, and now you have a deviant, sexually deviant psychopath. Okay, so a pig is someone we are not to be dealing with. If we do not have limits, if we do not put space between us and a pig, then Jesus says, they will trample your pearls. So you can keep giving and giving and giving and tolerating and putting up with and praying. I'll give you a hint. There's no need to pray about it. Jesus already told you, don't do it. So you don't have to pray about what to do. He tells you not to do it. The question is, why are you still hanging in there? Again, you need wisdom to know how to bring about changes, and that's where boundaries come in. But we have to implement boundaries. So again, to review from last week, what are the purpose of boundaries? It reflects reality. A boundary is a limit. Things are not going okay. And again, scale of 1 to 10. So it starts out small. We do extend grace for human error and human faults. That is not what we're talking about. When you start to morph into a pig, you have moved from, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being minor, 10 being professional grade, Super Bowl injuring someone else. You are at a 4, 5, and 6, and then so on. So we have to be able to discern. So we start small. Ideally, if someone has a sensitive conscience, they will dial themselves back. They will self-correct, and we will never have to bring it up. That's at a level 1. If someone starts to morph into a level 2, that's where we need to start speaking up. That's where we need to speak the truth in a reasonable fashion, because they are not now, they're no longer self-correcting. So it requires a conversation. Okay, so that's going to reflect reality. I'm letting the person know that their behavior is starting to negatively impact someone, me or the kids or someone around them. Boundaries also promote growth. So we're not here to whack and hack people and smack them. It's not vindictive. That's not a boundary, by the way. So boundaries that are measured, that match, there's goodness of fit, will promote growth. We all have blind spots. We all need to grow. So by someone starting to bring something to my attention, they're starting little by little to set limits. And it also serves as a wake-up call. Because if someone becomes steeped in self, they're starting to become deadened a little bit in terms of conscience, and they're not as receptive. So they need to be given some messages. They need to begin to kind of wake up and smell the coffee. Limits also permit natural and logical consequences. There is a time that I actually stop talking. I actually begin to allow whatever we discussed and what might happen or not happen. And this is very important, by the way, in parenting. Parenting does this. Decent parenting does what? We set limits and then we follow through. If you find yourself a screaming, nagging, repetitive parent, the problem is not the child at that point. The problem is we have a parent that needs to go back and think things through. The problem with a lot of dysfunctional families, actually every dysfunctional family, is we have an undisciplined disciplinarian, if there are kids. Someone that is beginning to focus on a kid. That kid becomes the black sheep. And then everything will start to revolve around focusing on that kid. That's very subtle. And the other spouse who's not doing that, but being requested to attend to it. So let's say mom is focusing on this kid. It's going to be very important that the dad, in a way, wake up. That's a hard one, because the moment dad begins to see that the mother is going too far or focusing too much, what's going to happen to that relationship? We looked at Mother Gothel. And in order to implement boundaries, and in a way that, in that case, it's sort of implementing boundaries toward the mother. And that's a whole nother program. We'll get into that. Okay. But you can be guaranteed, unless the husband isn't prepared for the beginning of some change, it won't happen. And it can go on for decades until the kids really are damaged. But if it's never too late to do the right thing. And if the dad wakes up, let's say it's the mom, Mother Gothel, he needs to demonstrate a clear and present awareness that that's going on, and then he will act accordingly. Boundaries will protect. As somebody starts to morph further and further into a pig, from a middle grade to a professional grade, now it's no longer about the pig. We're way beyond growth because that pig doesn't care. That pig is now a pig. Now we need to protect those that are being oppressed. And ultimately, those limits and those boundaries will bring pain. And that pain is what the Lord's going to use if there's any hope for that pig. They're going to get the pig's attention. That's different than a prodigal. We're talking purposeful selfishness. And that allows the Lord the maximum room with which to draw a bead. Almost that hunting idea. He takes the scope. The Lord's like a heavenly drone. He has all the time in the world. And if someone becomes extremely hurtful, the Lord takes note of that. Okay. So again, boundaries will stop the disrespect, the devaluing, the trampling of pearls. And if you don't stop it there, then they'll turn on you. That's what Jesus said about the pigs. Okay. So to trespass against another person presupposes you've crossed a line into that which you have no right and do not belong and are on someone else's property. So again, to set boundaries, it presupposes there's something very real. What is it about boundaries or what's being protected? Okay. Your opinion, the things that are yours, for instance, such as, here are things that are yours that you don't have to apologize for. Your opinion is yours. Your talents, your gifts and abilities are yours. Your future is yours. Your preferences are yours. Your right and ability to say yes or no, or to exercise your options, that is your right. Those are your pearls. And here's another important one. Your body is yours. We can get into a lot of different issues, but we're talking about what to do with a pig, what to do with a fool. Fools will not care about the other person. At that point in time, you have the right, and you need to begin to make some changes so your body is yours. Okay, now that's different than the biblical idea, as Paul talks about, that our bodies belong to one another if we are spouses. The assumption is this, that we're treating one another with respect, but sometimes maybe we start to get a little ornery, and that's selfishness. So what can happen in that point? I have a lot of power to punish my spouse, to withhold. If I am doing that in order to get my way, in order to manipulate, if I'm withholding for those reasons, then I am a pig. So that's not what we're talking about. There are many situations, especially with men, and especially men that have gotten into pornography. That is a massive problem right now. And it is in those instances that, by the way, if a guy is unapologetically into pornography, he is a philanderer in his mind. He is committing adultery. If he's bringing that into the home, I don't care where he's accessing it. Okay, something significant has to take place. It is not acceptable. It is not right to tell a wife that, well, boys will be boys and this is just what. No. Okay? That is not acceptable. If your husband is into porn, game over. You at the very least, you need to separate. Okay? With boundaries, what happens? What are the benefits? So by implementing boundaries, what are the benefits? Growth is promoted. Dignity is upheld. Respect is promoted as well. Trust is fostered. Emotional immaturity is moved toward maturity. Selfish habits are addressed. Difficult people are patiently yet persistently moved toward being less encrusted. Old codger, he's all encrusted in himself. And they're moved toward being less difficult. That is key. Let me repeat that one. Paul says we are to be patient with difficult people. Absolutely true. How scriptural is that? Correct. Patient while in what? In what state? Patient while speaking the truth. Nobody, or rarely does anybody change overnight. Although if you've been a massive pig, you better change overnight. Okay? Change takes time. We all understand that. And that's where grace comes in. So we will be patient with difficult people. But that doesn't mean cutting them slack. We're patient as we address issues. We continue to move one another on to the next level as iron sharpens iron. If you allow someone, by virtue of not addressing something, if you allow them to stay encrusted in self, then you are not helping them and you are not loving them. Love believes all things, love hopes all things. 1 Corinthians 13. If you think that your loved one is an old dog and you can't teach them new tricks, then you've equated your loved one with a dog, and that is not honoring and that is not loving. Do not ever fall for the lie that someone is beyond changing. I'll tell you what, if they were at work and their boss pulled them in and did a write-up, it's interesting how quickly somebody can change, right? A police officer pulls somebody over in the car, and my, oh my, if they're halfway normal, the driver, we're suddenly going to see nice manners come out, aren't we? Yes, sir. No, sir. No, ma'am. Right? Well, let's have that person in the home, meaning let's have the reasonable person in the home. Okay. What are the benefits of boundaries? Hurtful and negative attitudes are properly addressed. Harmful behaviors are dealt with, and they decrease. There should be, as a rule, and not just as a rule, this is what should happen. Over time, there should be a decreasing frequency of crud in the home. A decreasing frequency of sin, a decreasing frequency of selfishness. That's different than bearing with one another. Life has a way of throwing things at us, but selfishness, I am not loving if I allow someone to remain selfish. By implementing boundaries, the past is addressed to ensure it's not left to fester. How many dysfunctional relationships, and again, what is a dysfunctional relationship? Same thing, and that's where you get dysfunctional families. What is that? What's the definition of that? A dysfunctional relationship, a dysfunctional family, The term was popular in the late 80s, early 90s, but it's not a bad term. It simply means this. Dysfunctional means it's not working all that well. Well, in what way? When it has to do with dealing with tension. Okay, a dysfunctional relationship, a dysfunctional family is one that is tension reducing, because you have to bring the tension down. So it's tension reducing, but never tension resolving. So the tension is brought down, because if you don't bring the tension down, something is going to happen. So you have to bring the tension down, but it gets swept under the carpet. And now it becomes a landmine waiting to get stepped on. And so everybody at that point starts walking on eggshells. They tippy-toe around that. That becomes the elephant in the middle of the room, using AA or NA terminology. So every dysfunctional family is one that is not honest and is not operating in truth. That is unacceptable. We have to make sure that we are dealing with things properly. If not, things will go underground. Now they fester. And that's where emotional infections come from, as it were. If you have any buttons or triggers, trust me, something's been festering and you've pushed it. You thought it was out of sight, out of mind. Oftentimes in counseling, people will have anxiety or depression. That's the most common one of two issues that people will seek out counseling for. The vast majority of those, I would say almost 99%, unless it's an inherited or genetic or a organic disorder, okay, through a genetic illness, inevitably, if you are anxious or you are depressed, there is truth that has been pushed down and there's some words that need to be spoken to somebody somewhere. And until you deal with that, you're going to continue to find that a part of you is trying to get your attention, because we are designed for healing and wholeness. If you cut yourself, the body will try to heal it. If you are anxious, you're actually not anxious, you are filled with adrenaline. And that adrenaline comes from the fight-flight syndrome. That means a part of you is angry, pushed into a corner or losing control. A part of you is angry. So the good news is this: the world is not really filled with anxious people, or there can be every now and then. Okay, the world is filled with angry people. We are angry and we don't know it. We're playing mind games with ourselves. Okay, so the past is addressed, so it doesn't foster. Again, what are the benefits of having boundaries? So if you don't have boundaries, you'll never reap these benefits. The covert is finally brought overt, meaning the elephant in the middle of the room is finally addressed. Now people can begin to calm down, settle down, be less anxious. When kids act out, oftentimes they are acting out the tension or anxiety that's going on between mom and dad. Now it's carrying on. Now you'll eventually have anxious teenagers and anxious young adults, and then anxious adults. Anxiety, if it's not dealt with, can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, including for kids, because they're not very sophisticated. They tend to act out their anxiety as far as agitation. So if a kid is anxious, sometimes you will see him aggressive or angry. And it may be that, again, he's reacting and responding, really reacting to something in the environment that's going on. So there's stuff that needs to be addressed that nobody's wanting to talk about. We need to bring the covert overt. We need to bring it out into the light. Sickness and disease grows in the darkness, and you're only as sick as your secrets. Growing selfishness is confronted. So the benefit of boundaries is if somebody's allowing their selfishness to grow, we can finally confront it. And here's a very important piece. Why implement boundaries? Because then pigs will be unmasked and identified beyond a shadow of a doubt, and then you'll know you're not supposed to deal with them. And oppressive behaviors are stopped and prevented. So people now are being defended, finally. They're being protected from being continually hurt. It is not loving to sit back and allow someone in the family to continue to hurt another people once you know what's going on, and once you know that the person can stop being hurtful. How are you going to know that? You have to speak the truth. without boundaries. So if you don't say anything, selfishness is allowed to remain unaddressed. The relationship or family system, the feel within the family and how the family together operates, becomes dysfunctional, it becomes toxic, and risks being passed on to the next generation because of modeling. Kids are watching what's going on. You're teaching, if you're parents, you are teaching them how a husband and wife get along. And we wonder why not many kids want to get married these days. It can be passed on because of a lack of emotional intelligence due to negated intuition. If you've been told that what you're feeling really isn't what you're feeling or really isn't valid, then your natural EQ, that's being used a lot in business these days, emotional IQ, right? So EQ, emotional intelligence, is being thwarted because your intuition, you're being told in one way or the other, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. So now you have no means of really discerning, and therefore the pig gets away with it. So every pig is going to go after your intuition, as Silence said. And if it's allowed to happen, then the wounds, meaning what happens if selfishness remains unaddressed, emotional wounds will start to fester, and a lack of meaningful emotional differentiation, meaning you will never be able to grow up. You'll never be able to become your own person. And for those of you that are married, for those of us that are married, you will never be able to successfully leave and cleave. And the four big issues in marriage that will be inevitably involved in divorce are money. About 80 to 90%, a lot of divorces are over money. So money, sex, in-laws, and kids. Kevin Lehman wrote a book called In-Laws and Outlaws. Why is that a funny title? Because it rings so true. But we call them meddling in-laws. But really, an in-law can only meddle as long as I permit it. So a meddling in-law simply means this, that they aren't permitting the leaving and cleaving, but ultimately it comes down to the spouse. You can't control another person, so you cannot control what your in-laws are going to do. All you can control is what? The boundaries, the limits you place on them. We will pick up, at this point, what happens, again, if we don't have boundaries, and then how do we begin to implement those, and what keeps us from implementing them? We'll look at that on the other side of the break, right after this.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by John Euler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with John Euler about your situation or in having John conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.